today is Violence, Terrorism, and the Left. Our panel prompt is with an eye towards specific moments and epochs from the history of the left. How has the left historically approached the issues of violence and terrorism? Today we have Carter, who is a first-year student here studying politics. We have Gerald Smith, who has been in several organizations and is a longtime activist. We have Alex, who is a student activist. And then we have our professor way over there, coming in all the way from USF, who has written several books on very similar topics today. Okay, and without further ado, Kevin, we wanted to go this way.
Yeah, so let's do Carter, Alex, Gerald. No, so Carter, Alex, Elliot, Gerald.
Okay.
Hello. I was invited to this panel to speak as a member of a student organization known as Students for Justice in Palestine. We are supportive of Palestinian liberation and
Carter, speak up, just because it's not my.
All right, terribly sorry. We are in support of dissolvement of the state of Israel and Zionism in general. A lot of us have various political views related to our radical thought, socialism, Maoism, and various types of strains. I was asked to talk about violence and the left and how we've approached it in a lot of ways. When I was asked to do this, I started doing research on various militias or terrorist groups, such as the Irish National Liberation Army, communist parties in Asia that were in India, Nepal, and the Philippines, along with student activist groups that morphed and formed themselves into political groups during the 60s and 70s. And what I can gather from a lot of these groups is that some of them did have violent strains to them, but a lot of the time it was well-founded in activism and a lot of different political theory. It was interesting because many of the liberals who criticize us try to explain these various historical situations, such as the communist parties in Asia or Ireland, or any of the student activist groups here in the United States in the 60s and 70s, by abstract and representational concepts and sort of generalizing the way that we've done things. And they've particularly gone after individual members with the intent of talking about some very strange ways that these people were motivated, instead of actually examining the groups for their interests and reasoning manifesting themselves in society. It's definitely the classic nature of liberals to ignore the indexical and material reasons for groups of this nature to manifest themselves. However, the problem of the current way of examining those historical groups, the history of violence on the left, has been a lack of true analysis beyond the iconized concepts related to the topic. It's truly showing the lack of self-awareness that our current political way of being has, especially liberals and conservatives, who seem to not be very interested in the reason why these groups form in the first place. These groups formed out, and the ideologies that they carry, were formed out of material conditions and existing society, especially the political events that caused them to manifest themselves. And there must be a true understanding to the reason why those situations happened in the first place that allowed these people to form, especially in world economics and politics. The IRA, for example, formed because of British colonial rule, and we're doing that as a revolutionary group trying to fight the British out of Ireland, and especially Northern Ireland. In the examples of the communist parties in Asia, a lot of them formed due to various affiliations, sometimes with the Soviets, but most of them operated in good faith in the notion of changing the way politics was conducted in those countries, especially after the United States had left the Philippines in particular, and these groups were trying to figure out a new way of doing politics in those countries, especially around class consciousness. And as for the political groups here in America, especially these groups formed out of not necessarily necessity, but definitely a feeling of anger especially after the Vietnam War was beginning, and a realization that the United States may or may not be, or definitely was not, the paragon of virtue that many people in the world thought it was. Historically, these groups were not formed by some strange, abstract representation or motivation. They were formed via a lot of contradiction and a lot of material conditions in society causing these groups to form. It is not simply epiphenomena and these random events. It is these groups are the ideas that grow out of the soil that is material conditions. And how leftists like us, and I'd like to think that most of us, sorry if I'm using maybe generalized language, but a lot of how leftists, especially intellectual leftists, have responded to these movements have varied. It's never been a truly one-dimensional way of looking at them. A lot of them have responded with contempt in many ways. Others have responded with support, especially in instances of revolution against governments in the nature of Augusto Pinochet in Chile, or any of the other groups, especially the IRA in Ireland. However, a lot of the oafish liberals that criticize these movements never really seem to understand that these movements don't come as epochs of history. They come out of material conditions themselves and manifest themselves into ideologies. And it just seems to me, and many like me, that in order to actually gain class consciousness, we need to understand how these groups manifest themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Ready to start whenever.
Yeah. So, hi, my name is Alex. I'm a student not here, but I go to Kenyatta College in Redwood City, and I'm involved with the SJP on my campus, though I just want to give a disclaimer that, obviously the opinions I'm stating do not represent my organization. I'm just speaking for myself here. But basically, more or less, I agree with what you were saying. I do want to say that, as far as the title of this panel, which is Violence, Terrorism, and the Left, I do think that, I do think that in the case of violence on the left, I do think, sorry, I'm just tired. I just want to say that, look, I'm not necessarily opposed to revolutionary movements or the working class as a whole taking up violence. I don't necessarily, on a moral level, I support it, right? But my issue is, this is why I don't think it's a simple answer as far as, is it good, yes or no? Because it's what I'm against is individuals placing themselves above the masses and then claiming that they represent some sort of revolutionary movement. So, for example, I was told by Kevin before his panel not to talk about recent events just yet, but one historical example I would use was in the early 1920s in the United States. You had these group of European exile anarchists, and what they would do is they would carry out bombings, and they would carry out all sorts of assassinations. They were called the Gallianisti. They were Italian anarchists, and what it resulted in was the creation of a lot of the anti-immigrant laws and deportations of a lot of communists and socialists. So I think it's important to understand that, I support, I do think the working class has the right and the duty to take up violence against their oppressors, but it should never be done, by individuals who are not with, they should not be going ahead of the masses, right? And I do think that, at the same time, though, I'm not necessarily the sort of person to necessarily condemn when people do that. Because, especially in a lot of recent cases of this happening, I think the reason why people feel the need to take up, violence, or they feel the need to, carry out assassinations, in the past couple of months or so, is because, honestly, a lot of the existing left-wing movements or organizations, they've tried over and over again the same strategy of protest cages, of mobilizations that for 13, 14 months have just gotten us absolutely nowhere. And, honestly, this whole tactic of, mobilization and protest, the whole reason, like we don't just protest or mobilize for no reason. Like the whole reason why that's a tactic in the first place is because originally it was meant to be like, okay, like this is a threat of what we will do, like or what we could do if we decide not to be peaceful, right? But like the problem is, like the left in this country has been completely hijacked by not only the Democratic Party, but by also other demobilizing counterinsurgent forces such as the NGO industrial complex, the nonprofit sector, and like even like within the left, like a lot of these self-appointed so-called revolutionary organizations play the exact same role as all the NGOs and nonprofits that I had criticized. And I do think that a lot of these organizations create the conditions for people to just be like, you know what, fuck it. None of the existing organizations none of the existing self-appointed revolutionary parties are fighting for me, so I'm just going to go out and do it myself. Because honestly, like we can, like, because I've seen how like PSL, for example, or how all these other groups responded to the DC shooting 2-3 weeks ago. And I'm like, okay, like I understand how that doesn't like necessarily advance the cause of Palestine forward, but like he was like Elias was a like, and I'm not going to pin this on them. Like obviously I reject anyone who tries to do that, but like obviously you can see how Elias, who was a member of PSL and of other groups, he said before he did what he did that like, look, none of these existing organizations are like 13, 14 months we've been hosting nonstop protests and vigils. None of that has even not only stopped the genocide, has even made any even tiny progress towards that. So that's why like people, and you're going to see this more often in the near future, where people are just going to be like, fuck it. None of these existing organizations are fighting for us. So we're just going to, like, we may as well take up action on our own. So I don't necessarily agree with that strategy, like I said, but I do think it's understandable why some people on the left historically and today have felt the need to do so. And also from a historical standpoint, like the Bolsheviks would still defend people who, like, yes, even if they weren't, even if they condemned adventurism, even if they didn't carry out that sort of action themselves, like Lenin was very opposed to adventurism, but the Bolsheviks would still defend the rights of political prisoners and the rights of those, like they would defend the rights of Narodniks, for example, who often would carry out these sort of assassinations, right? Or in the context of the 60s and 70s, like the Panthers definitely criticized aspects of the Weather Underground, but they still defended them as far as like, they still defended them as political prisoners, and they still defended them against the state. So I don't necessarily think that it's as simple as like condemning adventurism, but I don't think it's as simple as like, okay, violence is always good. It's like, I always think it's contextual, so yeah.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Gerald?
Actually, no, let's go.
Okay.
Professor Neman?
Hi there. Excuse me. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. It's a very interesting panel, and I am going to give you my perspective from the point of view of my research and my book on the German radicals from the 1960s, which devolved into terrorism in the 1970s. I just want to, sorry, something in my throat. I just want to preface it by saying that when I was your age, the two of you who are the student activists, I definitely would have been on your side. I think it was Alex who said, I think I'm talking for all of you. When I was 23, I was you. I have a more complicated relationship to activism and the student movement and all of that. But let me just give you a couple of points, since I'm supposed to only talk for 6 to 8 minutes. First of all, I'll just outline to you the thesis for my book, which is Free Radicals. It came out in 2016. So before a lot of the campuses broke out in protest and sometimes violence, funnily enough, I was invited to the CIA to one of these red cell meetings where the CIA wanted to know whether or not the 60s was going to return in some way to the United States. And at that point in 2016, it was not on the horizon. But I will give you kind of the same answer that I gave them. In terms of the German students, so it was a movement that was modeled on the United States, on Berkeley and Columbia and some of the universities here, which were, first in on free speech and movements like that. And the same dynamic happened where it devolved into violence in the 1970s. You had the Weathermen here in the United States. You had the RAF, the Red Army faction. In other words, they considered themselves to be a grouplet inside of the International Red Army. And the main point in my book is that the students looking back at 1968, and 1968 is just an umbrella term for everything that happened, but 1968 is when it got really hot, both here and in Germany, that the 68ers looked back and took credit for introducing democracy into Germany, or let's say overcoming the kind of reactionary period of the 1950s and helping establish democratic norms and institutions in Germany. And in my book, I think that I disagree with that. I think that in many ways, the German student movement got in the way, in fact, of democratization, and precisely because of the fact that it devolved into senseless violence. Point number 2, and I'll try to stick within my 8 minutes and do 2 minutes on each of the 4 points. In the United States, what I argue in the book is that the radicals in the United States saw the constitutions as the grounding as a set of grounding principles, and believed that the Constitution had not been realized. And therefore, the American student activists were much less willing to turn to violence. You had the Weather Underground. They tended to attack things, buildings, right? Physical objects, not people, which is not true for the Germans. The German RAF, they kidnapped politicians, they killed people. That happened with the Weather Ground mostly by accident, but it was not their target. And I think that the American student activists believed that violence was not called for and not necessary because it was a slow, long process of realizing the promises that were made in the American Constitution. My third point is about Gandhi and Mandela. So if you look at Gandhi, who, of course, was the great defender and theorist of nonviolence, in my view, he took nonviolence too far. He argued, for example, that the Jews in Nazi Germany should have responded with nonviolence to their oppression, which, of course, is historically ridiculous. If you look at Mandela, he was a follower of Gandhi, for those of you who've looked at his career, and was originally, when he set up the opposition to apartheid, right, the African National Congress, he was in favor of nonviolence until 1960, when he realized that nonviolence was not going to work against this oppressive regime. And this is something that I'm sorry if I can't remember the names. I think Alex talked about this in the first presentation, right? For Mandela, there was no way to fight. Both of you, actually, both the students mentioned this. There was no way to fight this system without violence, but it was very targeted violence, and it was also against things and not against people. And that gets me finally then to the Black Panthers in the United States. And you have a representative here, and he can tell you a lot more than I can about it. But the Black Panthers is an example also where there was an attempt to navigate this issue of violence or nonviolence. And if you look back at their 10-point program, essentially they were fighting against police brutality and based on the Second Amendment. In other words, again, based on the Constitution, made the argument that they needed to defend themselves in order to fight against police brutality. And they have been tarred with the brush of being a violent organization. And that's a very complicated story that we can get into if you want. There were murders. In particular, Betty Louise von Patten, a bookkeeper from the Black Panthers, was murdered, and Huey Newton took credit for that, although it's a very complicated story that has not been clarified until this day. Most of the murders happened in clashes with the police. So the Black Panthers is an example in the United States of the kind of question that you are dealing with here today, and that Mandela and Gandhi dealt with as well. And I'll just sum up by saying, and agreeing again with your first speaker, it really depends on the context. It's not a question of activism therefore needs violence or therefore rejects violence. It has to be calibrated according to the goals and the particular context and the situation in which activism occurs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Gerald.
Okay. Oh boy. My name is Gerald Smith. I can talk about my past. Unfortunately, I'm 75 years old, so I got involved in politics when I was 14. So I have been through reformist organizations like the NAACP, cultural nationalist organizations like the Society of the Golden Drums. Then I joined the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers split in 1971. Oh, excuse me. Split in 1971, and I had to really start thinking about my commitment. Then I remember the situation occurred in Chile. And that was, Castro said, hey, Allende's got a third road. Well, he was absolutely wrong. Allende was murdered in the presidential palace, and Pinochet installed himself. That took a real study of myself to understand what is revolutionary politics? What is the way forward? So I joined the left, and that is, I was won over to Trotskyism. I was pretty much a third world Stalinist. Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam is gonna win, and also Che Guevara. I was very enthusiastic about Che Guevara, and I still respect him, but I learned I was won over to Trotskyism, and at that point, I became a Bolshevik, all right? So I'm looking at this now, this situation, assassination, violence, and the left, from a Bolshevik perspective, a Bolshevik political perspective. I want to take Aaron Bushnell, who was an Air Force member, set himself on fire outside of the Israeli embassy about a year ago, and he shouted, "Free Palestine," while he was burning to death. Elias Rodriguez shot 2 employees of the Israeli consulate, and on May 21st, Washington, D.C., and he said, "Free Palestine," right after he shot him. Mohammed Sabri Salman, a 45-year-old Egyptian national, yelled, "Free Palestine," and threw Molotov cocktails at the crowd, injuring 15 people. The demonstration was called for the release of Israeli hostages. And this happened June 1st, Boulder, Colorado. Okay? So I'm addressing those three things. When evaluating these incidents, we must keep in mind the past 19 months of Israeli aggression throughout the Middle East. Lebanon, Yemen, Syria. But I don't know if you guys are aware of it, but they done bombed Syria 500 times. And especially the slaughter of the civilian population of Gaza, with hundreds of thousands of people now facing starvation, and must be, I think that this must be front and center. You want to talk about violence? You know, this is tickle me. Trump actually gave the executive order to assassinate an Iranian Major General, Soleiman. Just, I think the last thing he did in his former regime. Terrible thing. What God, hypocrite. Hypocrite. Okay. In those 19 months since October 7th, 2023, despite massive opposition across the United States and internationally, both the Democratic and the Republican administrations continued to arm this genocide and aggressively target those who protest. So that's what I'm looking at. That's what I see. Now, just today I was brought to my attention medical anthropologist Gus Shalev, executive director of Physicians for Human Rights in Israel. He said the following: "We found that hospitals did not accept Palestinian detainees who were wounded and needed medical care." This is a quote from him. "We found that doctors inside hospitals were unwilling," we talking in Israel, "unwilling to treat Palestinian detainees or did not demand that the shackles from their legs and their arms and their blindfold be removed before they were treated. We found that doctors did not provide painkillers to Palestinians, claiming that they should suffer from the pain. We found doctors in Israeli hospitals that sent posted genocidal messages on their private social media accounts. We found persecution of medical doctors and nurses, Palestinian medical doctors and nurses in the Israeli establishment. So there's a whole system the whole medical establishment inside Israel has been actually supporting Israel's assault on the Palestinian people and particularly on its healthcare system.
1 minute remaining. 1 minute.
Okay, so let me just unquote. I am a member of a social democratic organization called the DSA today. Democratic Socialists of America, and here's their position. Seek to democratically transform our society and reject vigilante violence. We condemn the murder of Israeli embassy workers. Any statement otherwise is not the stance of DSA. Never mentioning the genocide. Brother Lenin, the leader of the Bolsheviks, rejected individual terrorism and assassination as a primary tactic for achieving political change. Lenin's oldest brother, Alexei, was actually executed in front of him. He was hanged in front of him because he was a Narodnik and had planned to assassinate Tsar Alexander III. Okay? Lenin witnessed the execution of his brother. While he acknowledged that individual terrorist acts could have a role in the broader revolutionary struggle, he emphasized that they were inexpedient and harmful, if not part of a mass movement. And that is my position. Lenin believed that only a mass movement could bring about genuine political struggle. And that is basically what I think. We have to have a mass movement to smash the state. And yes, there will be violence involved. But it is only the masses that can perform that task. Finish.
Okay, thank you. In the same order that we went, so Carter, Alex, Professor Neman, and then Gerald. Let's have our 3 minutes to respond to each other's discussion.
Okay.
And yeah, and we'll move on from there. So 3 minutes each.
I think that particularly with Gerald and the professor and Alex, who and I obviously share an organization, all stated very important parts of of something which is the leftist response to violence, which is the notion that we learn from it via the understanding of material conditions. And what I have seen, especially from Gerald's information that he has so aptly given us, is that the conditions for a lot of the political violence that have happened in the last 19 months since October 7th have manifested themselves due to the conditions that allow this to happen. If it is not, I'm not saying it's okay either. I'm not saying that these epochs, these individual opportunities of this happening are good. But I am also going to point out how they do manifest themselves because of the situations, of the material conditions that bring them about, which is, in this case, the Israeli slaughter of people in Gaza. And especially with the information around Lenin, one of the things that I would say is that, especially with Lenin, that in order for movements of this nature to happen, for the opportunity of change in political systems, there needs to be a mass movement of people that is dedicated to a notion of this nature. But I think that, especially when it comes to all of the situations that have been brought by Alex, by Gerald, by the professor, is that, well, I guess I wouldn't really have to say anything else. They have helped very aptly prove the point that I made, which is that these situations manifest due to the chaos of material conditions. It is better not to decree them like the liberals do, and act as though they are microcosms, as though they are epiphenomenal, that are just happening due to just the material conditions, but rather see them as the ideas that manifest themselves in political conditions. It is a very interesting way that ideology forms itself, especially ideology around things of this nature. And I think that a thing that should be considered in particular is talking about how these movements manifest themselves and how we can learn from them, and especially how the conditions that create them are our current society, not these individual acts being epiphenomenal. But I think that's what I would like to say, but we'll move on to Alex.
Yeah. Yeah, so my response is I generally agree with the point that Gerald was making, which is I think it's not violence that's the problem. It's whether the masses are behind you or not. I think that's the only really relevant question. And honestly, I don't even really deem it as violence if the masses are the ones behind it. I just think it's common sense at that point, right? But as Malcolm X would say, if it's in self-defense, it's not even violence, it's common sense. But anyways, I will say that I don't necessarily, because it's like, it's not only it's the genocide and the lack of action from people in the United States to stop the genocide, not just in the U.S., but in the broader, not even just the Western world, but also in the Arab states too, the broader global inaction to stop the genocide. Yes, we've had protests, we've had mobilizations, but for example, like much of the labor movement, like in the United States, like in Europe, it's different. The labor movement has actually been making some ground there, but in this country, like most of the labor movement has remained completely silent about the genocide, for example. And almost all of our elected officials, including like the DSA elected officials, all pretty much support the genocide. Maybe they might ask a few questions here or there. Maybe they're critical of Netanyahu specifically, but even Bernie Sanders, even AOC support the genocide. They just support it. They just support it with a happy face, right? But they still support the genocide. So for me, I don't really condemn at all what Elias Rodriguez did, and I don't really condemn what the Boulder. I don't know his name, but I don't really condemn what he did either. Not because I think it's a good political strategy. I don't, but frankly, because like with the global inaction, as Gerald pointed out, like what else are you, like honestly, what else are you supposed to do, right? Like if you're just some random person like who's like not very politically, who's not very ideologically or politically educated, but they're seeing the genocide go on their phones and on the news, like 24/7, like how else are you supposed to react to a genocide like that, right? And Elias like I mentioned before, Elias specifically was involved in a lot of these organizations, and he felt like they weren't really making any real progress to stop the genocide. So like you can condemn it as adventurous all you want, but like my question is like, do you have any better alternative? And so until you can like prove that, and like the thing is like until we can build a genuine mass movement, especially of the working class, to oppose the genocide, then like this is just going to continue happening. And yeah, that's my response.
All right. Thank you.
Elliot?
We can't hear you, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Hi there. I have a more complicated relationship to activism today, as I said. Let me just try to give you a different perspective. I don't think that the conditions are ripe today for any kind of mass movement. And there are reasons for that we could get into. I'm happy to go into it with you, if you will. But let me just give you one example. Gerald brought up the Comrade Lenin. What happened in 1918 was that Lenin made a deal with the German occupiers, who were certainly not out for the best interests of the Bolsheviks or the Russians, but in order to save the revolution, he signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March of 1918. And that's what allowed the Bolsheviks to survive. And my point about bringing that example up is to say that these kinds of mass movements, and that's what Bolshevism was. It was basically based on peasants and workers who were dissatisfied with the way that World War I was going. And based on other precedents going back to the 1905 Bloody Sunday. That was a particular situation where a mass movement arose that is nowhere in sight today. And so I really think that you have to not try to conjure up a mass movement out of thin air, but look at the actual situation. What you have is a backlash against the moderate left in the United States, never mind a mass movement, against the moderate left with the rise of Trumpism. Where is the mass movement today in the United States? It's MAGA. That's what the mass movement is. And so in order to fight against it, one is going to have to be very strategically smart. I want to say one other thing about what everybody is saying about what's happening in Gaza. I think that the reason there's such a backlash against what the student activists did by occupying campuses and so on, which has led to attacks on Harvard, Columbia, and all academic institutions today, is the hypocrisy of the left. Where were the students at when the Uyghurs in China were being attacked and put into concentration camps? Not a word. In the Sudan right now, there are 3 million, probably, and counting, victims of a mass murder that's going on at the hands of the Sudanese army. Where do you hear about that? Nothing. Okay? And I could give you other examples. Instead, you hear about Gaza, Gaza, Gaza. Now, what's happening in Gaza is awful, okay? But you cannot be surprised if people say this is anti-Semitic because the Jewish state, the only state that survived in order to save Jews from total annihilation in the Second World War, is being singled out for their attempts to defend themselves. And I'm not going to defend what the Israeli army is doing. A lot of bad things are happening there. But I think if you really want to get a grip, okay, on activism, you have to be careful about what kind of message is it sending, what is strategic, and historically what is accurate. And there's a lot of inaccuracies being thrown around about the Gaza conflict, okay? I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I'm obviously on a different page than the other three here, and you take that as a learning opportunity if you want. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gerald?
Yeah. I want to point out, by the way, so y'all know the history. Actually, I was close to the Weathermans because I went to Manhattan Community College, where I left school to join the Panthers. But I remember I was influenced by progressive labor. That's, and SDS. And in SDS was the Weathermans. And the Weathermen carried out 1,000 bombings in 1 year. I think it was 1971. But the only person that was killed was a Weatherman themselves that was manufacturing those bombs. So I think that Alex says that Bernie Sanders supports the genocide. I don't agree with Bernie Sanders because he went into the Imperialist Party to run for president. I don't think that's a good strategy. Class independence, political independence is a must for revolutionary organizations and but I don't think, I think it's a little much to say that he supports the genocide, and in fact, you see he actually has began to speak out against the genocide recently. All right. Now, what he's going to do about it is different. Now, to the professor. The conditions are not ripe today to building a revolutionary movement. I could not disagree more. And not only are they ripe, I think they're overripe. And in fact, here in America, you see, what we got, unfortunately, MAGA, you talk about the MAGA as a mass movement. Well, yeah, the mass movement of the settlers. This is a mass movement that approaches proto-fascist movement. Let's be careful. I think that the only reason they're not really fascist is because the left is so weakened. Now, here's a question. Why is the left so weakened? Well, I would argue that the American working class has not had an independent workers' party ever. So we get, and this I agree with Alex, people dancing with the Democrats, okay? And that's a problem. And I would disagree with that. So where were the students? Gaza. Well, I tell you where the students were. The students, I disagree, for instance, with this Ukraine stuff. I see the regime is infested with fascists, to tell you the truth. And I'm sorry, if people support Ukraine, and I do not support Russians.
1 minute.
Okay, Russians' invasion of, but I know why they invaded, and the Minsk agreement, for instance. We can go on and on. But let's say, where were the students? Well, I think one the UAE is funding the people, the counter-revolutionists in Sudan that are massacring the people of Sudan. And I think it's very confusing, to tell you the truth. It's very confusing. But where were the students? Well, the students are not the vanguard of the working class. We don't have a working class party. And therefore, there's a lot of confusion. So Gaza. Well, you know why? Because Palestinians live here. And I know some of them. And I tell you what, they are magnificent in terms of the struggle and the fight that they bring to the movement.
Okay, thank you. We're going to be going now to Q&A. So, members of the audience, please raise your hands. I'll be calling on you. You know how it goes. And please also speak up.
Yeah, of course. Hi, I'm Lisa. Lovely to meet you guys. My question is, as we see ICE immigration escalating arrests of U.S. citizens or residents or immigrants, and we see things like that happen in Buena Park in San Diego with de-arresting of these individuals, where does that stand as it escalates in your perception of left violence? How far can we go to de-arrest people or to remove them from ICE custody, especially in light of threats to suspend habeas corpus by the federal government?
Oh, man.
Who would you like to start with?
Jen, if you guys want to go.
Whoever wants to go first.
These two are more
I just, gentlemen, okay. I want to say we have to be careful with that because I personally would like to put a bullet through the heads of these so-called ICE people. They wear masks and abduct people.
Yeah.
What kind of? But what I want is not, our program. So our program is what mass. In fact, we have seen, and in San Diego, it worked because there was mass struggle. People came out from the community, and they actually turned that brother back. But you see, it is. I don't think that people are ready for a president that doesn't listen to judges. So we have a constitutional crisis, and we are not fully prepared for that. I would like to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, pretty much everything he was saying is what I was about to say. So I just wanted to say that, like, yeah, it's pretty much a question of, like, are we able to mobilize the masses to be able to, de-arrest people? And I think, honestly, I do think that as time goes on, it will more and more people will realize that the only way out of this is through a mass movement. So
That's right.
Does anyone else want to take it away?
I think that in terms of trying to stop ICE from potentially deporting people, potentially arresting American citizens, potentially people on green cards, I think that the best possible action would definitely be to protect people that could possibly be arrested in the first place, especially people who are on green cards, people who are, especially students here at universities like this. Universities will not protect students of that nature. That is just true. We saw that with Columbia. We saw that with a bunch of other
We
universities.
saw it here.
Yes, we did.
That's right.
Yes. So I would say, specifically when it comes to protecting our people from ICE, it would be a very massive imperative that all those people are kept in houses with a bunch of other people like us who would be willing to protect them from ICE custody. I think that trying to organize around them and defend these people would be the most important, because if ICE is allowed to simply be the American Gestapo and take away people's rights and especially deport them of anything, would be an absolutely insane notion, obviously. But I think that when it comes to something of this nature, I would recommend a specific example would be just, keeping them away from the places that they would usually be. Don't let them go back to their dorms. Keep them safe in houses with a bunch of people that support the same interests as them around them, especially American citizens who might be able to protect them. Yes, they could be under threat too. But it would be much safer, though, to do what a lot of people on this panel, especially Alex and Gerald, have been saying, which is to protect using the masses and to protect each other most of all.
Can I make an announcement?
Yes, but if Professor Neman has anything to say.
I'm sorry.
Do you have anything to say, Elliot?
I think that collective or individual action to fight against ICE will have exactly the opposite effect that we all want, which is to shut down these kinds of illegal arrests and deportations of people, because that will feed entirely into the hands of Trump and Stephen Miller and the people who are organizing these deportations, and they will use that as an excuse to clamp down on the protests even further and delegitimize the protests in the eyes of the public. So I think that is exactly the wrong way to go. I think the right way to go is to support the legal actions which are underway from civil society at very different and many levels, supported by people who care about civil rights, who care about the Constitution and the law, and that is a legal way to fight something that is happening illegally.
Okay, thank you.
Can I make that announcement?
Yes, you may.
I saw this. I work with a number of organizations, so I work with Food Not Bombs also, and I do deliveries. So this was in the refrigerator. That there are 7 refrigerators in Oakland, and we deliver food to the refrigerators. Okay. It says, immigrant defense organizing meetings. We say no to deportations. We fight back. Every Friday at 7 p.m., 1499 Fruitvale Avenue, Oakland, California. So I'm going to go to this meeting. I think this is a group called the PSL, the Party of Socialism and Liberation. Number 1, don't be sectarian. So I don't particularly, I'm not a member of that group. So what I want to see, do people respond to this? Because this is what I think our response. No legal, illegal, masses decide. You have to organize the masses in order for them to decide. You understand? And so while I'm not a member of the PSL, I'm going to go to this meeting because I think that it's the right thing to do. Mass organizing against the persecution of immigrants.
Okay. Phil, you in the back.
I just have a question. Mr. Smith earlier claimed that the conditions for a new Brad movement are overripe, and Mr. Neman here disagreed and said that the conditions are not right. And as a student, while I was in high school, but I saw the mass Palestinian student organizations, and even broader than that, some adult organized protests. But since 2023, there hasn't been a major broad political movement. So if the conditions for a broad political movement that sure can include violence are here, and it's been 2 years, 19 months since October 9th, why hasn't there begun a massive...
October 7th.
October 7th, sorry. Massive movement. Why isn't it happening? And then an additional question on that: the existing political parties that claim to be organizing the left, like the DSA, aren't seeing massive increases in their membership. So where is the broad political movement that we're supposed to be seeing?
Okay. And whoever wants to take this question first can take it away.
So yeah,
Okay.
so not every obviously, we've had plenty of mass movements throughout the last 60 or 70 years, and of course, most of the time, it hasn't really brought that much growth to different organizations. BLM was a lot bigger than this was, and yet the left as a whole didn't really grow that much because of it, right? So the question is not for sure. Obviously, it is a big problem that we're not able to transform those movements into any sort of political expression. But I think, and this is ultimately where I think the question of individual adventurism comes from, because there is no such alternative. There is no working class party or formation or whatever term you want to use. That the only options that are presented to people are either dance with the Democratic Party or it's do what Elijah did and shoot 2 people in the head in D.C. at the Israeli consulate. I think the question of I think the question of building I think it's important that a working class. I agree with Gerald that a working class party should be built. Obviously, I don't know if it's going to come anytime soon, but I do think that is what should be done. Now, I do want to say one thing. I do think the movement is in retreat. Unfortunately, I do think it is in retreat. So I don't necessarily disagree with. I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying here, but I think the reason it's in retreat is because there's no political expression, at least in our domestic context, in which it's been transformed into. Because in Europe, the movement for Palestine is still very much going on. It's actually growing, because over there they actually have at least some genuinely militant labor movements. In Italy, you literally had the dock workers. Back in October of 2023, they went on strike to stop arms shipments and other goods shipments to Israel, which is why now, the fascist government of Italy under Meloni is talking about an arms embargo. This is way more than we're ever going to get from even the most left-wing politician here. And same thing from they're talking about it in France, they're talking about it in Britain, all under center-right, or in the case of Italy, far-right governments. All because they've actually had a real mass movement, a working class mass movement, which has been built not even just since October 7th, something that's always existed in Europe for decades. There's always been a strong working class support for the Palestinians in Europe since at least the 80s, if not earlier. So I will say that it's because they've already done the work of building up the infrastructure that some meaningful change has been made. And I think the central question here is a lack of organization. So,
to add on to that,
Hold on. Did he want to speak?
Oh, Elliot, did you want to say something?
Sorry, you're asking me? Well, you just pointed, I don't know what world you guys are living in. You just pointed to where the mass movement was of the workers. It's on the right. That's what I said. It's MAGA. And Gerald said, well, but they're fascists. Yeah, the fascists were a mass movement. So that is where the energy is right now. It's on the right.
And therefore,
so
we should throw up our hands.
What happened to the mass movement? The question is, why is it on the right? That's the actual question to ask.
Carter, you wanted to speak?
I think I would like to add what Alex said, that there has been a lot of labor movements in a lot of different countries. I think America is a very special case because capitalism and our way of looking at everything that has existed is very much baked in, not just to our economic and political system, but it's also baked into culture, the way that we see things as Americans. We've iconized it. We've looked at it as a thing that is of value. And honestly, when I look at, especially with these political movements, an opportunity for a labor party or something of that nature, I think that what a lot of Americans are eventually going to see with the current two parties is that a lot of the Americans that are particularly reactionary, that are also ripe for class consciousness, are going to get the pound of flesh that they want. They're going to get all of the fear of immigrants alleviated. They're going to get all the hate of trans people and gay people that they want. But the truth of the matter is that's not going to change material conditions in life that they have. The reality is the material conditions are still there. That doesn't change. People are still unable to pay for their health care. People are still unable to get the various social safety net programs that they need in order to survive in some days. People can't get good jobs. Even if they can get a job, they're going to be paid absolutely terrible amounts of money because the people that own the companies are going to want to extract as much surplus value as possible. So what I would say to the notion that the conditions aren't there, the conditions are there, but I would say that America is a particularly dangerous country that has to reckon with this at some point, because a lot of these other countries do actually have substantial labor movements. There is opportunity with Britain, for example, and trying to maybe steer Keir Starmer a little more to the left. There's more opportunity in France, where there's a bunch of Labour Party movements that are trying to overthrow Macron. And the fascist Giorgia Meloni in Italy is not going to stay in power for the next election, I don't think, especially considering the massive working class movement that's in Italy. I would also, again, like to preface that America is a country that has all of this way of thinking baked into their political culture and life. But I do think within the next 6 years, maybe, that there is going to be an opportunity, a window for left-wing movements to have opportunity. I do think we actually are living in the same world, that we're living in a world of immense political strife, and that when the answers that reactionaries are looking for, that it's the immigrants' fault, that it's the gay people's fault, that it's somebody else's fault, when that doesn't solve the problem of actual material conditions, people are going to find another thing to blame. And that is when the opportunity for class consciousness arrives. But that's all I have to say.
Gerald, did you want to speak on?
Yeah, I wanted to say that, look, I believe in what's called revolutionary optimism. That is my philosophy, okay? And so people, the young man correctly, and the professor said, you got to deal with the reality, and what's going on, and are you in this world, and well, I'm in this world, let me tell you, and I see confusion, and people cannot act based on confusion. They need clarity. Okay? Now, this Palestine stuff, I was very impressed with the Palestinians that I actually met, that were the key organizers. I don't know what you see, but I see a mass movement. There was 1 million people in London, 1 million here in the United States. There were large mobilizations. I'm talking 30,000 people in some cases. I didn't write them down, and I don't know every city and all. But you know what? I realize, but here's the confusion. Hamas. I do not look to Hamas or any Islamic, formation, are not my leadership. You understand? I consider myself a scientific socialist, a Leninist, okay? But a lot of young people that are coming up, they don the Hamas T-shirts because, I'm telling you, because Hamas was the only people that are actually resisting Israel. And the way they chose to do it, I don't know if I agree with them. It's one thing to kill a soldier, it's another thing to kill a citizen. But see, it's confusing because the IDF is a citizen's militia. So it's kind of, I know people that have been in the IDF and then recoiled and then come back to the United States. So it's confusion. It's confusion. We need clarity. But I know pig is a pig. And yesterday they just had a high-speed chase where a young black man runs off and the police are behind him, and they're not supposed to engage in high-speed chases. And here's why. Because he ran into cars, got out, and then and he wound up hitting a teacher and another person, killing them. But why did this happen? Because of the high-speed chase, because the police were not disciplined. They have helicopters. Come on. But anyway, so the police, as far as I'm concerned, I live in East Oakland. I see this stuff all the time. No, I still feel like I felt when I joined the Panthers. The police, the pigs are out of hand. Inflation, something that is out of hand. Prices go up, your wages stay the same. Man, that's rough. That's rough. So we need a workers' party that has a program to deal with the police, to deal with inflation, to mobilize people, and actually to defend immigrants. Millions of people have to do it. Finish.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Let's go, gray shirt.
Talking to me?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So, I mean, oh yeah, sorry about that. I forgot about the laptop issue. I feel like the panelists, well, at least it's like Norman versus the three of you, or Neman. And like, however, I kind of feel like everyone actually sort of agrees on that violence or political violence and, you know, could be necessary in certain contexts. Terrorism, maybe never, if that means like an individual taking kind of political violent action. But it's just kind of more about like, should it be condemned? Should it be condemned vociferously? Like, seems to be kind of like what you're arguing about. But I'm also mostly wondering that it's interesting that it sees that if you're pointing the cause of like this current moment of political violence in response to the genocide of Palestine, like you're also seeing that it's going two ways, right? It's either like you were saying, like there's the center left who support it, tacitly support it, or whatever, and then there's the who knows what, you know, far right or far left, who are engaging in violent terrorism, which itself is, you know, if it's counterproductive, it's actually in a way in support of the violence in Palestine itself. But I'm wondering, like how do we get rid of this sort of dichotomy of these two like totally disparate paths, like, you know, and kind of you know, come to have a, I don't know, a productive response, you know, like, and more into detail than perhaps just like we need a mass movement. It's like, why is it, like, how do you maintain a mass movement if it is fizzling out, you know? Like, what goes on in these meetings that might stop them from, you know, becoming a mass movement? Something like that.
Okay. And as always, whoever wants to answer, please do.
Yeah, like, no, I understand what you're saying. Look, systems are not upheld by individuals. They're upheld by groups of people, right? So the reason I say this is because obviously nothing's going to change if you elect the right person or if you kill the right person. The reason why I say, so when I say mass movement, I just don't mean a mass movement of any kind. I specifically mean like organize the working class, organize the people who can shut down society.
Wait, I'm confused.
He's going to the bathroom. It's all.
Yeah, he is.
Kevin wanted me to do something. I don't know what it was.
Just hold on before.
Coming back.
Oh, just make sure.
Just hold, just manage that, you'll find.
Okay.
Wait, do I keep going or do I wait?
You keep going, you keep going.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah. So I would just say that, like, look, I think it's not just a mass movement that it's not just a mass movement that should be organized, but I think it should be like a mass movement of the working class, because the working class are the only ones who can like potentially shut down society and shut down the economy. Like if even just like let's say just the dock workers and the people making the planes just stopped, even for like a few months. Like, that would have very serious implications for the economy, and that would also put a huge dent into the resources of the army carrying out the genocide, and it would make it easier to pressure the Zionist entity into stopping the genocide. Now, I just want to say that, like, in response to Gerald, who's not here, he mentioned something about Hamas and October 7th. Look, it's funny because when he was talking about, like, oh, youth are like wearing Hamas t-shirts, he's referring to me because guess what? I do support Hamas. I do support Hezbollah. I do agree with the Palestinian resistance. And the reason I do is because, like, I support anyone and everyone taking action against U.S. imperialism. And I support it literally by any means necessary. So I don't even disagree. So I even disagree with him on the Russia-Ukraine point. I don't disagree with what Russia did. Not because I support Russia, but because, like, what the fuck was the U.S. doing in Ukraine to begin with? Like, I'm sorry, but, like, I think you're not, like, the point is that it's like you're not going to stop the genocide meaningfully unless you're not going to stop the genocide meaningfully. You're not going to stop U.S. imperialism meaningfully unless you fight, like the U.S. bombs and kills people every day. So, like, you're going to need to meet that with a response somehow. And of course, like, decolonization is not a metaphor, right? You can't, like, decolonization is not like just vibes or an essay or like a bunch of essays. Like, if you're going to, like, free your people somehow, you need an organization that's going to do that. And yes, you may need an armed response. So I understand, like, obviously I don't come from the Islamic background. I'm not a Sunni Muslim, but, like, he was mentioning, like Gerald was talking about, like, how he's a Bolshevik. Well, the Bolsheviks supported, like, they had a thing called the Congress of the Peoples of the East in 1919 in Baku. And Lenin did make an alliance with Ataturk and with different Islamic groups and secular nationalist groups throughout the Middle East. So I don't necessarily, like, obviously I don't think we should politically adopt their line, but I don't really care what their political line is. If they're doing the fighting, if they're the ones doing armed resistance, like, the only thing that really matters here is, one, do they have the support of the people that they're representing, which they do, and two, are they doing their due diligence of being the ones carrying forward the resistance, the armed resistance, which they are. Like, the secular resistance in Palestine capitulated 30 years ago. The PLO capitulated. So Hamas is a natural result of the secular leftist resistance, which, like, the PLO were not communists, but there were Marxists inside of the PLO, and the PLO were definitely of a much more leftist character than Hamas are. But Hamas exists because the PLO failed to meaningfully free Palestine. So Hamas were like, okay, if they won't do it, we'll be the ones to do it for you. And that's not an endorsement of the Islamic, the sort of Islamic ideology, because ironically, it is the Arab states that have pretty much normalized, they've capitulated on the question of Palestine, especially the surrounding Gulf states in Egypt and Jordan. So it's not necessarily an ideological question, it's who is meaningfully, materially doing damage to U.S. imperialism, who is meaningfully carrying out resistance to the genocide. And if you're going to criticize Hamas, it's like, okay, you better provide an alternative. Mm-hmm. And I haven't, like, there has been, like, so all these leftist Zionists that have, like, been like, oh, why are all these leftists? You've not provided any meaningful alternative to Hamas. I'm sorry.
Are there any points you would want to maybe repeat very quickly to Gerald now that he's back, to get everyone on the same page?
I didn't say that much while you're gone. I just said that, like, fuck, I forgot. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Does anyone else want to take it?
Okay. Well, I said I don't follow Hamas. That's
all right. Elliot, did you want to take a stab?
Well, I think the question was about where do you draw the line about murder? And that's a pretty straightforward question and a good question. And the line you draw is if you're going to celebrate someone like Luigi Mangione for killing the CEO of United Health and you think that's a good thing, I think you've gone over the line. I think you've also gone over the line if you're going to defend, like Carter did, the Russians against Ukraine. The Russian state is a fascist state. And
Just a
what
quick
the
addendum,
Ukrainians
that
are
was
doing...
just a quick addendum, that was Alex, not Carter.
Oh, sorry, Alex. I mixed you guys up. I'm sorry. I was trying to figure it out. Alex, you're confused, very confused. The Ukrainians are defending their national interests. They're the ones here who are doing the fighting, right, for freedom, for rational self-independence. Russia is a fascist state. And what you see here, and it's the same thing with Gerald, who says, well, you know, I don't necessarily support the Russians, but I don't really blame them. Who's really to blame? No, it's pretty clear who's to blame, okay? The Russians invaded the Ukraine. What the Russians want to do is reestablish a Tsarist regime, a 19th century Tsarist regime, and the Ukrainians are fighting for their national self-determination. That's where the left should be. One last thing, that it is Carter, I think, who gave us a very good orthodox explanation of where this working class movement is going to come from based on material interest, right? It's pure Marx, right? Substructure, right? And then the overstructure. And look, Alex, that doesn't exist today. That simply doesn't. You have to ask yourself, why is the working class in Europe and in America, it's not that different. Why are they moving to the right? Cultural reasons, maybe, ideology for sure, right? It's not the substructure, right? It's not the way Marx would have predicted it. So that's what I meant by what world are you guys living in? It's right in front of your face what's going on. The working class has gone over to the right. And unless you answer that question, why, you're not going to begin to ask how the left reestablishes itself.
Okay.
Wait.
I'll let, okay.
Which one do you want to respond?
I will. Well, I'd say that those who defend the established way of being, especially when it comes to its very, very heavy amount of control and monopolization on the violence of the system, whether it be a police officer beating up a minority or a army of citizen militia going into a small strip of land and killing a bunch of children, or not being able to afford health care, I think that people have to understand, certain people who defend the establishment, particularly the liberals and the conservatives, who say that you should be able to take that establishment as it is and act as though you, through that system, especially the legal system or any sort of ridiculous way of doing things, is simply through that system, when that system is particularly designed in a way that is meant to smite and destroy any type of revolutionary or radical movement that may actually make any meaningful change. Those people are going to be the ones that continuously uphold the oppressive and capitalistic and controlling system that allows these things to thrive and act in a way that create more and more violence and more chaos. The reason why a person like Donald Trump or a movement of like Benjamin Netanyahu or any types of movements like that are able to manifest is because the system is here, because that is what it would want. The system of capitalism and the system of government in America and all other countries around the world, the only reason why movements of that nature are able to manifest is because they are able to. The reason why working class movements in the United States never worked is very simple, because the system didn't want them to. It is particularly simple for me to say that if the system is allowing for something as crazy as allowing someone to have a terrible back that ends up pushing them towards a crime that may or may not involve a silenced gun, those things happen not because the person on a microcosmic or an epiphenomenal level, that doesn't happen because they just happen to have it, because society has conditioned them in a way that allows it to happen in the first place. It is simply ridiculous to say that on an epiphenomenal level that these things just happen because they happen because of material conditions. No, they don't just happen because of material conditions themselves. They happen because material conditions are in a way that creates people of this nature. The reason why Hamas happened in the first place was because of Benjamin Netanyahu and his party, the Likud. The whole reason why that group of people even exists and they're even a problem is because look who funded them to wipe out the PLO and make it much more difficult for a left-wing movement to establish itself, especially a Marxist movement. Opportunity and the system prevent any type of radical change from being done because it wants to. And it's, frankly, just sort of a very, very liberal and very revisionist way of looking at history to say that these things happen just simply because of people's just like very angry things or like the anger that we feel within ourselves. No, they don't happen because of that. They happen because the material conditions make it so. And that is what a lot of very ahistorical people would definitely love to do and just simply chalk it up to people being mad. No, people are mad because the system is terrible. And the system is terrible because it's made so by our economic and political conditions. So if you say, oh, this happens just because it's an epiphenomenal thing and that people just do things like Luigi Mangione killing a CEO, that doesn't just happen because the guy felt mad about his back. It felt bad because he felt bad about his back because of a company that allowed it to happen. So I don't know what the hell anybody's talking about.
I don't know. I never used the gibberish word epiphenomenal, but you should check your facts, brother. Hamas was established long before Benjamin Netanyahu, okay? And they were elected under Sharon, not
Need I remind you who funded them, my friend?
Let's keep the arguing to minimal. Let's not talk over each other.
Fuck yourself.
No, but that you're right about that.
Okay, so let's move on to maybe the next question.
Wait, but Alex, you wanted to respond.
Yeah, I just wanted to
sorry
respond
about
to
that.
one point he made about like why the European working class is heading right wing. I disagree with you. It is entirely the substructure. I have one word for you: deindustrialization played a massive role in why the working class, especially in Britain and in France, are no longer voting for the left-wing parties. Remember, in France, it is all the former constituencies of the strongholds in the rural areas of France, of the PCF, that are now voting for the National Front and for Le Pen. And it is actually because of the fact that Le Pen, not Le Pen the daughter, but Le Pen the father who created the party, who back in 2005 ran on a sort of left-wing economic platform. And even Le Pen the daughter has sort of a left-wing economic platform. A lot of the European populist parties, they're not like the U.S. Republicans in terms of like that sense. I just wanted to say that like I don't disagree necessarily that there is a mass movement behind MAGA or that there is a mass movement behind the right wing, but for reasons I just explained, like there's a reason why the working class may there is a very material reason why the working class may support these things. And honestly, I know a lot of people in MAGA. I was MAGA at one point. And I want you guys to understand that, like, a lot of people I know who are MAGA are critical of U.S. aid to Ukraine. And a lot of whom are even critical of Zionism to an extent. Maybe not to the extent that I am or to the extent that we are. But you do have people who, in that camp, who are starting to question Trump and who are starting. So honestly, it's not necessary. So I don't necessarily disagree that we should, like, I do think we should try to reach people in that camp. But, like, the solution to doing that is not to basically capitulate to their platform ideologically and, like, just agree with everything Trump and the U.S. are doing. No, actually, the solution is to do the opposite. It's to be the most radical voices against the establishment and against the two-party system and against capitalism. So
if you think the materialist history interpretation of history is correct, why did the workers with the deindustrialization go to the right and not to the left?
because the trade unions didn't have as much power as they once did. Simple as
There's
that.
always an excuse. Okay, now it's the trade union's fault.
It's not the trade union's fault, but like
You know, the liberals and the
You can argue with the big response.
Let's not argue yet. Kevin, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah.
Please go.
All right. Thank you guys for what's been a lively and perhaps necessarily heated discussion so far. So I wanted to ask a question about given the recent, I think, events over the last year and maybe extending a bit before that, you do have a lot of young people, not necessarily Alex or Carter, but plenty of young lefties, progressives, Marxists or socialists, whatnot have you, make a very unique claim, which is that it's their Marxism or their leftism or their socialism or the theory that they've read that authorizes supporting violence and terrorism and turning it into a virtue. Now, I think maybe all four panelists may or may not take issue or try to qualify the claim at least. But if I think about theory, so let's use Marxism or socialism as an example, historically, it saw its goal as there was a politics involved, and the goal was to bring forth socialism or communism, the glory days, what not have you, onto Earth. And there would need to be a revolution for that. So that's like point B, and point A is various young people saying, okay, like Marxism or leftism or socialism or being anti-capitalism involves turning violence and terrorism into a virtue, whether it be in the case of Luigi or the recent embassy shooter or Hamas or what's going on in Russia and Ukraine right now. So maybe for you guys, watching these young people from afar make such a claim, I'm curious how you guys think of the internal logic of getting from that point A to point B. Like, what's the internal coherence of that theory? How does one get from violence or terrorism as a virtue to world communism or world socialism? Again, you guys may disagree with the premise, so you guys might respond differently, like how does it fail to go from A to point B? But also, I'm also curious in your guys' opinion, how far can point A get to B, if at all?
Okay.
May I?
Yeah, sure.
I'll let you go first.
Let's start with Carter.
I think that when it comes to, okay, you said point A is the terrorism, the violence. And
Yeah,
point B
the
is like
support by young
okay.
people today, and not just regular young people, people who will claim that Marxism or leftism or anti-capitalism alibis it, and that's to turn it into a virtue. And point B is world socialism, world communism. Like, how do we get from A to B? Or is A like going to move us backwards from B? Or is A just going to zigzag? Or does A going B at all? Like stuff like along those lines.
How do we get from point A to point B? Okay. I think it starts with the feeling of a lot of young people that the established way of being, especially when it comes to liberalism and conservatism, the way that we look at our current state of the world, we see these ideologies, these current established ideologies, and we look at them and we say, well, they aren't very able to reflect the reality of actual material and real life conditions. They don't understand the idea that people are dying. People can't afford health care. People can't, live their lives in a meaningful way. People won't be able to fix the U.S. imperialist and colonialist problems with these ideologies, because these ideologies have an inability to actually understand material realities. That is the truth of the matter. They can't truly latch on to the real world problems. They are very idealistic, yes, liberalism and conservatism, but neither of these ideologies actually has any understanding of real world economic and political conditions. So that's the first step. The second step is people trying to find a new option. Why is this this is happening, and it's really bad ideology that causes this to happen, this terrorism, this violence. Okay, so people realize from that, I don't want that, I want something else. So people do a bit of soul searching, they look around, and they find something of the nature of world socialism or communism or something of that nature.
Sorry, Carter, let me clarify. I don't mean one's path to Hare Krishna or coming to believe something. I mean concretely, if you were to put the idea into practice, how do you go from thinking leftists saying violence or terrorism virtue to achieving world communism or world socialism on Earth? I'm not talking about the idea, yes, I get what you're saying about the ideology, but how do we go from point A, that position, towards point B, actually achieving socialism on Earth? That's the question.
Okay. I would definitely say that it would, I think Marx definitely talked about this a lot, that it would have to require, especially in the critique of the Gothra program, he talked about how from a social democratic standpoint, that we would move from that way of thinking in current politics to more communistic thinking and beginning to dissolve sort of old ideas when it comes to these ideologies and other stuff. But in order to enact these ideas, there would definitely have to be mass movement, and people would have to start agreeing with the notions of communism and socialism. It's obviously, I haven't studied that as much as I have studied the theories themselves, but I think it would have to be sort of on Marx's path that he talked about when he was talking in critique of the Gothra program, which was just sort of steps from government and moving more towards something of that nature.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to respond to that comment or to the question as a whole?
Yeah, so I know. Anyways, I just wanted to say that, like, so in response to Kevin's question, I don't, like I've said before, I think it's contextual. I do think that I don't think it necessarily moves us backwards, because, like, if you look at how the masses responded to Luigi's assassination against Brian Thompson, like, literally all sorts of people were celebrating it, including MAGA people were celebrating it, mind you. So I don't necessarily think it always has to take us back. The key question, again, as I've always said here, is how are the masses going to react to it? That's, I think, is the only relevant question. And if the masses, the masses fucking hated Brian Thompson, and the reason why, like, the CEO of United Healthcare, they hate that industry. So for him to have so I think for Luigi to have assassinated him, I think politically was something that didn't, like, it wasn't something that politically did make sense, because it was already a target that was hated by the masses, and a lot of people already oppose, like, even like the masses already very much dislike the healthcare system in our country. So I'm not saying, like I said, like, obviously we do need a mass movement, but the masses, a lot of the masses have adopted Luigi as their rallying cry. Not leftists, but I mean like working class MAGA people in the Midwest who I know of, like, also resonate with Luigi. So I don't think that adventurism is the thing is, like individual acts of so-called terrorism don't necessarily have to bring us back, although they can bring us back. Like, one famous instance of this happening, and assuming this wasn't like a false flag, was the Reichstag fire in 1933, which gave Hitler the excuse to completely suspend civil liberties. So I just wanted to say that, I think it all depends. I know Kevin's not here, so I'm just going to wrap this up. By the way, I just wanted to ask one question to the person on the computer here.
Professor Neman.
Yeah. So you mentioned at the very beginning, I think either in one of your responses or in your initial talk, that that you were consulted by the CIA for something. Did you turn Mickey Mouse on us, please? Because from some of the stuff you're saying, like,
okay.
I would not be surprised.
Is this relevant to Kevin's question?
The question was, why was I invited to speak today? Well, the CIA has red cells. The red cell, which is quite funny because it comes out of the 60s, has a completely different meaning. The CIA has red cell groups, and what they do is want to imagine scenarios that have happened in the past so that they can anticipate it happening in the future. And so they were interested in foreign infiltration by student groups and domestic student groups. What would be the catalyst for outbreaks of revolutionary action, violence, etc., on campuses today? Now, that was 2017. It was just as Trump was, was just as, it was before the election. Trump hadn't been elected yet. And, no, that's not right. It was, it must have been 2015 then. I know Trump hadn't been elected. It must have been 2015 then. And so that's why they had me there. Yeah, it's kind of normal. Why? What interests you about that, Alex?
So, now at this point,
Okay. Let me just say this.
Okay. On Kevin's question?
There is a class line in society, okay? The working class has never been totally left. You know, come on.
I'll be right back. I just need five.
Probably more like 10% socialists, and it kind of fluctuates between 5 and 10%. Now, I think that Alex was right when he said deindustrialization certainly affected the working class, but the working class was never in its majority all leftists. Come on, that's silly. That's silly. No, see, what we need to do is establish a revolutionary party, develop a revolutionary program, and that I actually,
I'm sorry. I hate to interject, but is this responding to Kevin's question?
Yeah.
No, that's
Okay.
fine. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm definitely responding.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Because what we need to do is develop a revolutionary program. That's the thing that is missing. That's the missing link. And unfortunately, we don't have a revolutionary party to advocate a revolutionary program. What we have is small groups. And unfortunately, that's not gonna cut it, okay? So we need to develop a revolutionary party that has a revolutionary program. And that's how you get from A to B. Because I just can't, working with the CIA, there's a class line, all right? And some people would never work with a spy agency of the imperialist capitalists. Some would.
Okay, thank you.
I would. What's wrong with working with the CIA?
Coups? Coups? I don't know. I feel like there's a guy named Salvador Allende who
Let's just start naming
died.
countries.
Salvador Allende who died.
Wow.
Domestic
Okay,
torture
guys.
program.
I don't
Okay,
know.
okay.
Maybe there's a couple things
Carter.
that the CIA did wrong. I don't know. I feel like they've committed
Carter.
war crimes, for
Maybe
example.
you don't know much about intelligence services. Maybe a lot of them do that.
You don't know about
Okay.
me.
You speak to
You're
way too many of
ahistorical
them.
as hell, for example.
Okay. Professor Neman, do you have anything to respond to the actual question posed by Kevin?
Well, Carter, no, I'm mixing. Yeah, I think it is Carter. Carter's the one who just spoke, right? Who just asked me about the CIA.
Yes, that's Carter.
So the question was, how do you get from? Kevin asked this question. How do you get from violence, basically, to a world socialist state or world communist state? Now, Alex likes to quote Marx. So Marx believed that Marxism was scientific, and one had to go through stages. One of those stages being the bourgeois stage, and communism would follow, right, at the end of history, in a Hegelian sense, at the end of history, would follow scientifically. Lenin, as you all know, corrected that because it wasn't happening. Alex mentioned the Gotha program. That was against Bernsteinian revisionism because the socialist parties in Europe, particularly in Germany, were organizing the classes for reform, for gradual improvement of their conditions rather than a world revolution, okay? So Lenin decided that a vanguard party had to take over the revolution and make it happen, the kind of thing that Gerald just alluded to. So the question is, how do you get from violence then to the world communist state? Well, it has to be a state which monopolizes the violence. That's what the Russians did. And under Stalin, they gave up on the idea of world communism. And so, if you want to get to world communism, you need a state with a vanguard that is going to decide that it is going to lead the way right into this utopian future. And that has not happened and likely will not happen any time in the future.
Especially if we're talking to the fucking CIA.
Well, I mean,
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions from the audience? Vrish, let's hear it. Probably the final question for tonight.
So I just want to
Speak up.
get your guys' perspectives. Sorry. I just want to get your guys' perspectives on mass movements surrounding Israel and Palestine, and countries surrounding Israel and Palestine. So Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, because sort of their governments have been a little bit unresponsive. So, for example, Egypt, when Israel took over the Philadelphia corridor, which is run by Egypt, they did not sort of fight back from that, even though it's their it's sort of like their territory. And with that, Israel subsequently closed off aid from entering that corridor. And sort of the Lebanese government sort of didn't really do much other than saying, please stop bombing us, when Israel was bombarding Lebanon because of Hezbollah. And then the Syrian government, both before and after the topple of the Assadist regime, had not done anything sort of to stop Israel. And especially now when Israel has been taking over parts of Mount Hermon in Syria, the Syrian government now has not done anything against it. Same thing in Jordan, there hasn't been really any sort of action by the Jordanian government. The King Abdullah has not really surmounted much against Israel. But the people in those countries are very not happy about both what Israel is doing and the government's response to Israel. And I just want to get your perspectives on the future of mass movements in those countries, both against the inaction of the governments and against Israel. And so, yeah.
And do you guys want to fold in your closing remarks into these things?
Yes, please do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can we take it from how we started the introductions? Perfect.
I think especially in the surrounding countries around Palestine, I think that around Israel and Palestine, I think the problem has been just this lack of action. Especially we used to have situations with Anwar Sadat and Egypt, who were actually a country that were very much interested in the notion of Palestinian liberation, but the problem was he eventually capitulated and gave up, obviously under President Carter. Camp David was a very big example of a lot of these things, especially with a bunch of other countries around there. I think just the problem with a lot of these movements of liberation in these other countries surrounding Israel and Palestine is just there's just been this lack of action that I haven't seen with anybody other than maybe Hezbollah doing something in Lebanon, but I'm not very optimistic about especially the Arab countries there that are actually trying to do something, because a lot of them haven't really done anything because Israel has been protected by the United States, and a lot of those countries are afraid of attacking the United States' extension, that is Israel. I don't know. I think we can move on to the next person now.
Okay, thank you. Alex?
Well, there's a reason for that. It's because the United States dollar is the global reserve currency, and all those countries, those Gulf countries, are a very integral part of how the imperialist economy works. So when they have to choose between keeping themselves rich and stopping the genocide in Palestine, obviously they're going to choose to keep quiet as long as the money keeps coming in, which it will. And the point is that I think the reason why you see Yemen and Lebanon, like actively taking part in the resistance. Well, parts of both countries, but basically the reason why you see them actively supporting the resistance versus the Gulf states, Jordan and Egypt, not doing anything is because in Yemen, in Lebanon, you actually have, as I've hinted at, and others have hinted at in this conversation, they both have mass working class movements. They both have mass political movements, which are actively taking it up to go out of their way to fight the genocide. In the Gulf countries, you can't legally organize at all. Not even just talking about like a communist or socialist party. Trade unions don't exist. Political parties don't even exist. They're absolute monarchies. So, of course, there's going to be there's no real means to be able to pressure these Gulf states and to be able to pressure, like sure, Egypt and Jordan do have political parties and do have trade unions, but they're still very repressive environments. So in all these Arab countries we're talking about, they actively repress their own populations with the support of the U.S. and Israel, right? And that's what allows a lot of these countries to keep, a lot of these governments to stay in power. And in regards to Syria, like, the current government, like you kind of even, I didn't hear your whole question, but you even kind of hinted at it yourself. Like the current government in Syria literally has not even gone as far as to condemn what Israel is doing. Yet they're focusing their efforts on sending people door to door and killing Alawites, killing Shias, killing other ethnic minority groups, killing Kurds, all these other ethnic minority groups on the behest of both Turkey and of Israel. So since this is closing remarks, I just want to say this. Look, and I know like this is relevant to my closing remarks, but in response to what you were saying about Bernie Sanders supporting the genocide, the reason I say Bernie Sanders supports the genocide is because while he may not support, he may criticize the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, he may criticize Netanyahu, but the genocide took place at multiple different phases, at multiple different stages, right? And the Nakba, I consider it to be an ongoing process. It is not just a singular event that happened. So what Bernie is proposing is simply just reversing from the current stage of the Nakba to the previous stage of the Nakba. That's all it is. And even there, he's not necessarily, like Bernie refused to call it a genocide until like the last 2 or 3 months. And even now, like he's still saying Israel has the right to defend itself against Hamas. He's still saying that. And he's having pro-Palestine people, not even protesting against him, just being there. People with kafiyas being arrested at his events. So I consider him to be a class enemy. I do. And even if all that were not true, I would still consider him a class enemy, simply because he is supporting a political party that was founded by people like Andrew Jackson, founded by a racist, slaveholder, aristocratic class. And you cannot separate the Democratic Party from that, because that is what the Democratic Party is fundamentally meant to do. So I will say that, like, it's the same, and honestly, it's the same thing in a lot of the countries in that region. You have Erdogan talking all the time about how like Hamas are like these resistance fighters and how like we stand with the Palestinian people, but yet 40% of Israel's oil trade comes from Turkey. So, and a lot of these Arab countries, it's like the same thing to an even greater degree. So honestly, I just want to say that like the only way you can really stop the genocide, in my opinion, is through a mass working class movement. And how we get there, like, it remains to be seen. I don't have all the answers, but I do have a general idea of what it would take. So on to Professor Ratatouille over here.
Come on, Professor Ratatouille. I like class enemy better. Look, if you want a direct answer as to why the surrounding states aren't doing anything, you have to take them one by one. Egypt, obviously, Hamas is a Islamic fascist organization. It began in Egypt with the Muslim Brotherhood. Egypt is deathly afraid of that organization, wants to stamp it out. They were responsible for the murder of Sadat and causing all kinds of trouble there. As far as the Shia in Syria, Lebanon, and so forth, that has to do with Iran and their attempt to basically create a crescent there across the states from Iran all the way to Lebanon, which is now beginning to break down. luckily. And the Gulf states obviously are opposed to them, and that's why they're in no mood to help out. And that's why you got close to these Abraham Accords, which predated Trump. But the Palestinian issue was never taken seriously by the Gulf states. That was really done for propaganda purposes and also to satisfy a home audience there. And once the Gaza war winds down, in whatever way it winds down, and calling it a genocide, by the way, is completely ahistorical. We could do a whole other debate on that. But once it winds down, then I think you'll see a move back basically towards some kind of agreement. What they want is different governing bodies, both in the West Bank and in Gaza. And that's what's going to happen because Hamas has created a situation where they have destroyed their own people. Hamas is primarily responsible for what happened in Gaza. They use those people as shields. They put them in the line of fire while they live the high life in Qatar and other places. So Hamas is the class enemy, if you want to talk about class. My final comment is just, look, guys, go ahead, knock yourselves out using Marxist theory. It's over, it's done, it's historical, it doesn't apply anymore. And I would look for other theoretical instruments.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. Gerald, you're up.
Okay. One, I would argue that Marxist theory program has been betrayed. For instance, in Germany, there were 200 social democrats and 2 million. 2 million social democrats in 1932 and 1 million communists. Unfortunately, Hitler won out because, one, the Social Democrats, quote, sold out or revised Marxist theory. And, it's known Edward Bernstein rewrote Marxist theory he has a book called Evolutionary Socialism that is rejected by orthodox Marxists, people that, think that Marx. I actually think that when the professor says Gaza, 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 he is right in one sense of the term, or one sense of his concept, and that is revolutionaries have to speak to the felt needs of the working class, not just one particular oppression. And I would actually agree with that, but I think that one, there is a genocide going. It's clear for most people that the genocide is going on. And that should be a part of the program for revolution. Now, when you say, Egypt, Jordan, see, who is it that carries the whole program of revolution? And it is the working class. I'm not sure that those, countries in the Middle East have a very developed working class. But we do here. We do here. And that is what I think. We always turn home. We have to start to develop a working class political party here at home. That's what and it must have a revolutionary program. that speaks to Gaza, 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 and also the economic needs, the felt needs of the working class. That's how, and to tell you the truth, we have to struggle with the working class. You know? So that's how I would try to answer your question and also my closing remarks. Thank you.
Okay, can I get a big round of applause for our panelists and Carter? Okay, thank you guys. PR's over there.